How do you test documentation usability? In this video, we're going to dive into that and more. And hey there, my name is Josh, and I have over 10 years of experience in technical writing. I'm also the founder of Technical Writer HQ. But before we dive into the video, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, and that way you won't miss any of our future videos. Now let's go ahead and get started. So one factor that determines a product success is a user experience. And in turn, the user experience will depend mainly on the ease of using that said product and the technical documentation that comes with that product. Now, whether the product is hardware or software, technical documentation is essential to its success. But how can we be sure that our technical documentation fulfills its function? Well, this is where documentation usability comes into play. Testing documentation usability is a practical, effective, and straightforward approach to determining the effectiveness of that said documentation and how it influences the user experience. And documentation usability refers to how easy it is for the user to use a documentation to achieve their goals or purposes. And in most cases, this is the proper use of a hardware or software product. It is important to emphasize that although the technical documentation must be correct, up to date, and relevant, it does not mean that this is its main purpose. In fact, the main purpose of technical documentation is to guide users and readers to achieve an objective. And this is achieved through the fast and efficient transfer of complex information in a simplified way. An example of a user goal is learning to solve a problem or understand a generally complex concept or idea in the shortest time possible. So if you have a software product and maybe trying to understand how to use a particular feature like an editor or a certain type of mode. And in other words, the main purpose of documentation is usability. And so why do you need to test documentation usability though? Well, just as companies test a product before launching it on the market, it's necessary to test documentation's usability to ensure that it fulfills its purpose. And the objective of the test is simple: to determine how the user reacts to your documentation and how easy it is for them to use it to solve their problems and meet their objectives. And this is why it's very important for you to map out the user's objectives that go along with that documentation. And releasing a product or documentation without first going through a testing phase often leads to product failures and worse things such as lost revenue, reputation, negative brand perception and association, and even lawsuits. On the contrary, when companies take the time to test their products and documentation, it brings great benefits to the company, such as improving the development process, gaining knowledge to implement future updates, and ensuring the product's quality, which is largely contributes to the company's success. And documentation usability expert Jacob Nielsen lists 5 essential qualities within efficient usability design. We have learnability, so how easily can users accomplish basic tasks the first time that they come across your documentation. We also have efficiency, how quickly can users perform the task after learning from your documentation. And memorability, when users return to the documentation after a period of absence, how easily can they reach proficiency again? And errors, how many errors do users make when using your documentation? Also, how severe are those errors and how long does it take to recover from them? And finally, satisfaction. How pleasant is it for users to use your documentation? In short, testing documentation usability is essential to detect weak points and correct them before launching. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next point, which is what to test in documentation usability. Well, the first area to evaluate documentation usability is the content structure. This is a structural format that organizes the content of your documentation. And the first time users access your documentation, they most likely won't be interested in reading it from start to finish. Instead, they'll be looking for specific information to help them solve the problem. So when you are testing the usability of your documentation, make sure it's divided into sections and it's easy to navigate. Now, when we say that the content must be easy to navigate, well, we refer to the ease with which users can find the information that they're looking for. And once you've structured your content and divided it into sections, you create a table of contents or an index to make navigation through the content more intuitive. Another thing you'll want to do to improve navigation throughout your content is to make the information searchable. And you can achieve this through an index and keywords that users can search to find information more easily. Another crucial area for testing documentation usability is readability. Regarding readability, most style guides like Elements of Style by Strunk and White and the API Style Guide recommend using active voice. Unlike the passive voice, in the active voice, the subject of the sentence is followed by the verb and then the object of the verb. Example, The programmer wrote the code. While using the passive voice is acceptable, the active voice ultimately creates more concise, clear, and direct sentences and is easier for the reader to understand. Another point to consider when it comes to readability is to avoid using long sentences. Long sentences are more difficult to understand than short ones, and according to the Hemingway app, a popular writing tool, long sentences are suitable for postgraduate level education readers mostly. Now, that's likely not your typical reader. Now, on the other hand, short sentences are easy to read for people with a 9th grade education level, which makes up the majority of most audiences. Consequently here, it's better to use short single idea focused sentences to improve readability as well. Another thing to improve readability is to avoid very short or long paragraphs. While paragraphs that are too long intimidate the reader by looking like walls of text, especially on mobile devices, paragraphs that are one line or just too short demonstrate a lack of structural organization and thought. To avoid this, combine them into multi-sentence paragraphs or presenting them as lists is better. And the last essential aspect of improving readability is to watch your vocabulary. While technical vocabulary is acceptable for engineers or colleagues, most documentation is written for a general audience. And for this reason, you should watch your vocabulary and avoid using technical jargon to prevent confusing the reader. Now let's go ahead and move on to content quality. A well-structured document with good readability is useless if the content is of poor quality. If you want your content to be of quality, ensure you meet these 4 criteria. Certainty, your content must be able to solve problems, not generate them. Then we have relevance. Your content must be up to date. Nothing worse than outdated content that is not useful for your readers. And then we have completeness. You want to ensure that your content includes all the information the reader needs on a specific topic. And finally, you want to make sure that your content has a necessary amount of information. So excess or lack of content can have a negative impact on readers. If they have to read through 2 paragraphs to get to what they're looking for, well, they may just not read it at all. So while content structure, readability, and quality are essential aspects, visual appeal also plays a vital role in documentation. And although this is often subjective, human beings are drawn to aesthetically pleasing objects. Therefore, make sure to use aesthetic elements to increase the visual appeal of your documentation, but provide value at the same time. So not just throwing something in there to throw something in there. And now that we know the aspects of test and documentation usability, let's look at how to test documentation usability. So there are 3 methods for testing the usability of your documentation. And the first is paraphrase testing. This method focuses on the user's understanding. If after reading the documentation, the user can interpret it in their own words, well then congratulations, your documentation is easy for users to understand. Now on the contrary, if a user cannot paraphrase the content of your documentation, it means that your documentation needs to improve concerning the reader's understanding. And then we have the plus-minus testing. This technique focuses on the documentation as a whole, asking users to review the whole documentation and make recommendations on what content to add and what to remove. And the results of this test are considered precious feedback because it comes directly from users. And finally, we have task-based testing. This test determines how easily and quickly users can find and understand the information in your documentation. And if users take too long to find the information, well, you must improve navigation and search. And if they can find the information that they're looking for, but they can't understand it, well, you need to ultimately improve the content structure, readability, and content quality. To conclude here, documentation usability testing is an essential process you cannot overlook. Skip the process and it will negatively affect your documentation user experience, subsequently affecting the product success, revenue, and more. And if you have any questions about documentation usability, make sure to drop them in the comment section below this video. And if you feel like you now have a better understanding of the topic, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe to our channel, and that way you can get more information on technical writing and how to become a great technical writer. And I'll go ahead and see you in some of our following videos. Cheers.